안녕하세요.
The bustling streets of Seoul were alive with movement as neon lights flickered across the glass facades of towering skyscrapers. The city never truly slept, but for Kang Joon-hyuk, the CEO of K Group, nights like this were the only moments he could steal a breath. Sitting alone in a high-end lounge, he loosened his tie and exhaled, staring at the untouched whiskey glass before him. Another day of ruthless boardroom meetings, another event with investors, another reminder that his life was nothing but an endless cycle of power, money, and control. Joon-hyuk. A familiar voice broke through his thoughts. He turned and found Seo Yoon-hee, his oldest friend, approaching with a grin. They had known each other since Min-jae had always been the carefree one, the only person who saw Joon-hyuk as more than just a business tycoon. "You're here alone? What happened? Did you finally scare off your assistant?" Min-jae teased, sitting across from him. Joon-hyuk smirked but said nothing. His eyes flickered to the bartender as someone else caught his attention. A woman in a black dress, standing behind the counter, collecting empty glasses. Her long wavy hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, a few strands falling over her face as she moved with effortless grace. There was something familiar about her. Joon-hyuk narrowed his eyes, and then she looked up. Their gazes locked, her breath hitched. A second of hesitation. Then she quickly turned away. Impossible. Joon-hyuk's fingers tightened around the glass. His mind raced, but his body had already reacted, his heart pounding with a force that surprised him. "That girl," he muttered, his voice lower than he intended. Min-jae followed his gaze, and upon seeing her, his expression shifted, uneasy, almost guilty. "Joon-hyuk, don't." Joon-hyuk turned sharply. "Who is she?" Min-jae hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Seo Yoon-hee." The name hit him like a crashing wave. Yoon-hee, Min-jae's half-sister. The girl his family had never recognized. The girl who had always existed in the shadows, hidden from the world of wealth and prestige. Joon-hyuk hadn't seen her in years, not since that day. Memories he had buried began to surface. A stormy night, a girl in tears, a promise left unfulfilled. Yoon-hee kept her head down, moving quickly as if she hadn't noticed him, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly. She had recognized him too. Joon-hyuk pushed back his chair. "I need to talk to her." Min-jae grabbed his wrist before he could stand. "Leave it, Joon-hyuk. She's not part of our world." Joon-hyuk's eyes darkened. She was never given the chance to be. Min-jae sighed, but didn't stop him as Joon-hyuk stood and walked toward the bar. Yoon-hee turned her back to him, pretending to be busy stacking glasses. "Yoon-hee." She froze. Slowly, reluctantly, she turned. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes held something dangerous, of resentment, of pain, of something left unresolved. "It's been a long time." Joon-hyuk searched her face, but she simply looked at him with detached indifference. "I didn't expect to see you here." Her voice was calm, but her grip on the towel in her hand tightened. Joon-hyuk tilted his head slightly. "Neither did I." For a moment, silence stretched between them. The noise of the lounge faded, leaving only the weight of the past pressing down on them. Then, Yoon-hee smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't real. "If you're here for small talk, CEO Kang, I'm working." Joon-hyuk flinched at her tone. Not Joon-hyuk. Not the way she had once said his name. Now, he was just another man from the world that never welcomed her. He clenched his jaw. "Yoon-hee?" She turned away before he could finish. "Enjoy your evening, sir." And just like that, she walked away. But Joon-hyuk knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a coincidence. The name Seo Yoon-hee refused to leave Joon-hyuk's mind. Days had passed since their brief encounter at the lounge, yet her voice, her expression, the coldness in her eyes lingered like an unfinished sentence. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more. The fact that she had acted like a stranger, or the fact that she had every reason to. Joon-hyuk had met Yoon-hee years ago, back when Min-jae had first mentioned her his half-sister. Born from an affair their father had swept under the rug. Unlike Min-jae, who had been raised in luxury, Yoon-hee had spent her life in the shadows, ignored, forgotten, unwanted. The first time he saw her, she had been standing alone in the rain outside a school gate, watching Min-jae from a distance. She'd been just a child, but her eyes had carried the weight of someone who had already learned that she didn't belong anywhere. Joon-hyuk had been young, too young to understand why a family would turn its back on their own blood. But he had seen something in her. Defiance. And maybe that was why, despite the world telling him she was no one, he had found himself drawn to her. Until that night, the night everything changed. Joon-hyuk's car pulled up outside a small cafe on the outskirts of Gangnam. The place was modest, far from the high-end establishments he was used to, but it was where she worked now. He stepped inside, scanning the room, and there she was, wiping down a table, hair pulled back, her face set in quiet focus. She looked different from the girl he remembered, more distant, more guarded, but still her. Yoon-hee glanced up, her eyes meeting his for the briefest second before narrowing. "Are you following me now?" Joon-hyuk raised an eyebrow. "Would it be a problem if I was?" She exhaled sharply, setting down her cloth. "What do you want?" Joon-hyuk took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You left before I could talk to you." Yoon-hee folded her arms. There was nothing to say. Joon-hyuk studied her, searching for a crack in her indifference. "That's not true." Silence stretched between them. Yoon-hee's fingers curled slightly against her sleeve. "You really don't get it, do you?" Joon-hyuk frowned. "Get what?" She let out a bitter laugh. "You look at me like I'm the same girl from back then. Like nothing has changed." Her voice lowered, sharp with something that cut through him. "But Kang Joon-hyuk, your world and mine, they were never meant to cross." He felt his jaw tighten. "And who decided that?" Yoon-hee met his gaze without flinching. "Your world did." Joon-hyuk opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, another voice interrupted. "Yoon-hee, are you okay?" A man stood behind her, another employee, concern written across his face. Yoon-hee glanced at him and smiled. Not the distant forced smile she had given Joon-hyuk. A real one. Something inside Joon-hyuk twisted. "I'm fine, Jae-won. Thanks." Joon-hyuk didn't know why that name suddenly irritated him. Yoon-hee turned back to him, her expression unreadable. "I have work to do. If there's nothing else." He stepped closer before she could finish. "Yoon-hee, that night, why did you leave?" Her breath caught. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, and Joon-hyuk saw something flicker in her eye space. Hesitation, regret. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. She straightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Liar." Joon-hyuk clenched his fists, his frustration rising. "You do. And I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth." Yoon-hee's lips parted slightly, but she quickly looked away. "You should leave, Joon-hyuk. Not until you leave." Her voice trembled just enough for him to hear it. Joon-hyuk inhaled sharply, realizing something. She wasn't pushing him away because she hated him. She was pushing him away because whatever happened that night still mattered to her too. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the cafe. But as the door closed behind him, one thought consumed him. He was going to find out the truth, no matter what it took. Joon-hyuk didn't believe in coincidences. If fate had placed Yoon-hee in his path again, it wasn't by accident. Something unfinished remained between them. But she wasn't making it easy. Days passed, and no matter how many times he returned to the cafe, Yoon-hee kept her distance. Short answers, polite indifferences if she were trying to erase the past. But Joon-hyuk had built an empire by not accepting rejection, and he wasn't about to start now. Fate intervened faster than expected. At an exclusive gala hosted by the Kang family, filled with CEOs, politicians, and heirs to the most powerful families in Korea, Joon-hyuk played his usual role, the calculated businessman, the perfect son. But just as he was about to step into a conversation with foreign investors, his gaze froze. Across the ballroom, carrying a tray of champagne flutes, stood Yoon-hee, dressed in a sleek black uniform. She moved between guests with careful precision, keeping her eyes downcast. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in his world. Joon-hyuk's pulse quickened. How? Why? And then he saw it. Min-jae, standing near a group of executives, his usual carefree expression absent. He knew she was here. Their eyes met. A silent warning. Joon-hyuk ignored it. Instead, he moved. It wasn't hard to catch Yoon-hee alone. She had just stepped into a quiet hallway, setting down an empty tray, when his voice cut through the silence. "You really didn't want me to see you, did you?" She stiffened. Slowly, she turned, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm working," Joon-hyuk scoffed. "At a Kang family event?" She shrugged. "It pays well." He studied her, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. "You really think I believe that?" Yoon-hee sighed, crossing her arms. "Joon-hyuk, you have a life to live, a company to run. I don't belong in your world, and you know it." Something inside him snapped. "Who told you that? My father? Your family? Or have you convinced yourself it's true?" Yoon-hee flinched. For a moment, raw emotion flickered in her eyeshirt. Anger, something deeper. Then, as if realizing she had let her guard slip, she shook her head. "You don't understand." Joon-hyuk took a step forward. "Then make me understand." Yoon-hee exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the hem of her uniform. "This isn't a fairy tale, Joon-hyuk. People like me don't suddenly become part of your world." Joon-hyuk's jaw clenched. "And what if I don't want my world without you in it?" The words hung between them, heavier than the air itself. For the first time, Yoon-hee looked afraid. Not of him, but of what he had just said. Before she could respond, a voice interrupted them. "I told you to leave this alone, Joon-hyuk." Min-jae, standing at the end of the hallway, his face unreadable. Yoon-hee immediately stepped back, creating distance between them. Joon-hyuk exhaled sharply, glaring at his friend. "So that's why she's here? You knew I'd see her." Min-jae didn't deny it. "She needed the job. I made sure she got it. That's all." Joon-hyuk turned to Yoon-hee. "Is that all this is to you? Just another job?" She hesitated, and that hesitation told him everything. Before she could answer, Min-jae stepped between them. "You need to stop this, Joon-hyuk." Joon-hyuk's fists clenched. "Why? Because she's your sister? Or because you know I'll never let this go?" Min-jae's eyes darkened. "Because if you dig too deep, you won't like what you find." A cold silence settled between them. Min-jae's words weren't a threat. They were a warning. And in that moment, Joon-hyuk knew. There was a truth Yoon-hee was hiding, and he was going to find it. No matter what it took, Joon-hyuk wasn't the type to let things go. For days, Yoon-hee avoided him, disappearing before he could corner her, changing shifts at the cafe, refusing to engage. Min-jae was no better whenever Joon-hyuk confronted him. His friend dismissed the topic with vague warnings, but warnings only made him more determined. Something had happened that night years ago, the night Yoon-hee disappeared from their lives. And now, he was going to uncover the truth. Through a few discreet inquiries, Joon-hyuk finally tracked down a woman who had once worked as a housekeeper for the Seo family. They met in a small restaurant, away from prying eyes. "You're looking for answers about Seo Yoon-hee?" Joon-hyuk nodded, his gaze sharp. The woman hesitated before speaking. "That poor girl, she never had a chance." Something cold settled in his stomach. "What do you mean?" The housekeeper sighed. "She was never supposed to exist. When she was born, Chairman Seo refused to acknowledge her. Her mother, your friend Min-jae's stepmother, was cast aside like she was nothing. The only reason they let her stay in the family's home was out of pity, but she was never treated as part of the family." Joon-hyuk exhaled, already knowing the story, but the housekeeper wasn't done. "But do you know why she really left?" He frowned. "I assumed it was because she was tired of being treated like a secret." The housekeeper shook her head. "Number she left because they gave her no choice." Joon-hyuk's pulse quickened. "What?" The woman lowered her voice. "Chairman Seo made a deal. If she left quietly, he would provide for her mother. If she refused, they would be left with nothing, no money, no home, no future. The mother begged Yoon-hee to go, and so she did." Joon-hyuk felt his blood turn to ice. She hadn't just left, she had been forced out. That night, Joon-hyuk found himself back at the cafe. Yoon-hee was wiping down tables when she noticed it. Her shoulders tensed immediately. You again? Joon-hyuk stepped forward, his eyes burning into hers. You lied to me. She blinked, caught off guard. What? You made it seem like you left on your own. But that wasn't the truth, was it? Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Joon-hyuk exhaled sharply. I know what happened, Yoon-hee. She flinched. I know they forced you to leave. The silence between them felt deafening. Then finally, she spoke. And what do you want me to say? Joon-hyuk's jaw clenched. I want the truth. Yoon-hee let out a bitter laugh. The truth? The truth is that it doesn't change anything. She shook her head, her voice trembling. Do you think knowing makes a difference? That it somehow fixes the past? It doesn't. Joon-hyuk stepped closer, lowering his voice. Why didn't you tell me? Yoon-hee swallowed hard. Because what would you have done, Joon-hyuk? She met his gaze, her expression raw. You were the heir to an empire. You had a life already written for you. What could you have done then? Given up everything to help me? I couldn't let you do that. His heart pounded. That should have been my choice. A single tear slipped from Yoon-hee's eye before she quickly wiped it away. Maybe, but I made it for you. The air between them felt heavy with unsaid words, with all the moments they had lost. Joon-hyuk inhaled sharply, realizing something painful. She had left to protect her mother, and to protect him. But now, standing here, Joon-hyuk understood one thing. He wasn't going to lose her again. It's not over, Yoon-hee. She let out a shaky breath. Don't do this, Joon-hyuk. But he had already made up his mind. I'm not going anywhere. Not this time. And as he walked away, he knew one thing for certain. This time, he was going to fight for her. Joon-hyuk wasn't the type to dwell on emotions. He built his career, his reputation, and his power by making decisions based on logic. But nothing about Yoon-hee was logical. She had buried herself in a world where she didn't belong, away from the privilege she had been denied. She had accepted that life, even when it had been unfairly forced upon her. But he couldn't accept it. She belonged to more than just the shadows, and he was going to make sure she knew it. That evening, Joon-hyuk called Min-jae to meet him at a private lounge. His friend arrived with an exhausted sigh, throwing himself onto the couch across from him. So, I assume you're not going to let this go. Joon-hyuk leaned back, crossing his arms. You knew. This whole time. Min-jae exhaled. Of course I knew, but it wasn't my secret to tell. Joon-hyuk studied him, his frustration growing. Why did you never try to bring her back? Min-jae ran a hand through his hair. You think it's that simple? My father gave her a choice that wasn't a choice. If I had interfered, he would have destroyed her and my mother. It was the only way she could survive. Joon-hyuk's fists clenched. That's not survival. That's exile. Min-jae sighed, looking straight at him. What are you planning to do, Joon-hyuk? Silence stretched between them. Then, Joon-hyuk spoke with certainty. I'm going to bring her back. Min-jae's expression darkened. And if my father fights back? Joon-hyuk's eyes hardened. Then he'll have to fight me too. The next night, Joon-hyuk arrived at Yoon-hee's cafe just as she was finishing her shift. He waited outside, watching as she stepped into the cold night air, pulling her coat tighter around herself. She stopped when she saw him. Joon-hyuk, what are you doing here? He took a slow step toward her. I need you to listen. Yoon-hee hesitated, but she didn't walk away. I know why you left. I know what they did to you. And I know that you let it happen because you thought it was the only way. Her fingers curled into her sleeves, but she said nothing. Joon-hyuk exhaled. But I'm telling you now, you don't have to live in the past anymore. Yoon-hee let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. And what does that mean, Joon-hyuk? Are you going to rewrite my life? Bring me back into a family that never wanted me? Or maybe you just want to soothe your guilt? His chest tightened. I never felt guilty. She froze. Because I never once regretted knowing you. Yoon-hee's breath hitched, but she quickly looked away. Joon-hyuk, it's too late. No, it's not. She exhaled sharply. And what if I don't want to come back? Joon-hyuk searched her face, then took a slow step closer. Then I'll go wherever you are. Yoon-hee's eyes widened. What? Joon-hyuk's voice was steady. If you can't return to my world, then I'll leave it. I don't care about the company. I don't care about the name I was born into. All of it means nothing if I can't decide for myself. She shook her head. You don't mean that. Yes, I do. His words were quiet, but they carried the weight of every choice he had never been able to make. Yoon-hee took a shaky breath. Why? Joon-hyuk's lips parted, but for the first time he didn't have an answer. Because the truth was so simple, yet so terrifying. And Yoon-hee could see it in his eyes. Her lips trembled, her voice barely above a whisper. You love me. Joon-hyuk exhaled slowly. I do. For the first time, he let the words exist, outside of himself. And for the first time, Yoon-hee couldn't run from them. But before she could respond, the sound of an approaching car made her stiffen. Joon-hyuk turned, his expression darkening as he recognized the vehicle pulling up to the curb. The door opened, and Chairman Seo stepped out. Yoon-hee's face paled. Joon-hyuk felt his blood boil. The chairman's cold gaze settled on his daughter. Get in the car, Yoon-hee. Her hands trembled. Number. The chairman's jaw clenched. You have no place with him. Joon-hyuk took a step forward, standing between them. And you have no power over her anymore. The chairman narrowed his eyes. You think you can fight me, Joon-hyuk? You think your name will protect you? Joon-hyuk exhaled slowly. Number. He glanced at Yoon-hee, then back at the chairman. But I don't need my name to protect her. The chairman's eyes flickered with something unreadable. But Joon-hyuk wasn't afraid, because he was no longer fighting to protect a company, or a reputation, or his own selfish desires. He was fighting for her, and this time, he wouldn't lose. Not again. The cold night air was thick with tension. Joon-hyuk stood between Yoon-hee and Chairman Seo, his presence unwavering. The luxury sedan behind the chairman idled quietly, waiting. Move aside, Joon-hyuk. Joon-hyuk didn't move. She's not going anywhere. Yoon-hee held her breath. The chairman's lips curled into a humorless smile. You're making a mistake. Number. Joon-hyuk's voice was calm. For the first time, I'm making a choice. And what do you think happens next? The chairman scoffed. Do you believe you can just throw everything away? Joon-hyuk's jaw tightened. I already have. The chairman's eyes darkened. Yoon-hee's breath caught. What? Joon-hyuk turned to her. I resigned this morning. The words hit harder than any slap. The chairman's composure finally cracked. You're lying. Joon-hyuk's smirk was cold. Call my father. Silence. Yoon-hee stared at him, disbelief in her eyes. Why? Because I was tired of pretending. The chairman scoffed. You think you'll survive without the Kang fortune? Joon-hyuk's gaze didn't waver. I'd rather build something real than live in a cage. Chairman Seo looked at Yoon-hee one last time. And you? Are you foolish enough to believe this will last? Yoon-hee's hands trembled, but she met his gaze. It's not about belief. It's about choice. For the first time, Chairman Seo had no response. Without another word, he stepped into the waiting car and drove away. The past finally let go. For a moment, the world felt silent. Then, Yoon-hee exhaled. You gave up everything. Joon-hyuk's lips curved slightly. Number, I just chose something more important. She swallowed. And now? He chuckled softly. I don't know. Yoon-hee searched his face. For the first time, he was unguarded. You're really okay with that? Joon-hyuk's gaze softened. Yes. Her heart pounded. For years, she had been unwanted, discarded. But now, Joon-hyuk had left his world. For her, a lump formed in her throat. And if we fail? Joon-hyuk stepped closer. Then we failed together. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay. Because some endings aren't endings at all. They're just the start of something new. Yoon-hee adjusted the books on the shop's display when she heard the door open. She didn't need to look up. You're late. Joon-hyuk smirked, setting a coffee in front of her. Busy meeting an investor. She raised an eyebrow. A real investor? I bring coffee. That's important. She rolled her eyes but smiled. It hadn't been easy, but they had built this life together. For the first time, they weren't just surviving, they were living. Joon-hyuk took a sip of his coffee. Regrets? Yoon-hee met his gaze. Not even one. Because sometimes leaving behind everything means finally finding home.
You're my eternal